This is the Actual Fluency Podcast, helping you become a better language learner by providing motivating weekly inspiration, as well as top tips and tricks from expert guests. And now, your host, Chris Broholm.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 105 of the Actual Fluency Podcast. I'm really excited to be bringing you guys another episode, and what an episode it is. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to say that every week I'm joined by amazing language learners, industry experts, and just people who have achieved something I would say is well over the extraordinary. And this week is no different. I'm joined by a person I greatly admire. Her name is Lydia Machova, and she's from Slovakia. And I first got to know of Lydia back in, I believe it's the first polyglot gathering I went to, or maybe the second one, when she did a interpreting workshop. And it had limited seating, and since I didn't speak many languages, I still really don't speak that many languages, but I didn't go to it, so I never knew who Lydia was. And then a year or so later, Lydia actually came up to me and said, "Hey, I like the podcast and thank you for what you're doing." And I didn't know it was Lydia, so I was just kind of saying, "Oh, cool, great to meet you." And we had a little chat, and suddenly the penny dropped, and I was really excited to get to know Lydia, but also a little bit annoyed that I hadn't met her before, because she's really amazing. And this interview has taken some time to get together. We've been talking about doing it for a long time, but of course scheduling is always a difficulty, and we've had the holiday seasons and so on and so forth. But now Lydia is here, and we're going to talk this week about some of her passions, which include language learning, of course, but also interpreting with languages, and some practical tips and advice for that, and also her kind of concept of language mentoring. I know that there are people who do this. I've heard of other people doing it as well, but I certainly haven't seen many do it to the extent that Lydia does, and it's a great idea built on I guess it was Churchill, or maybe it's one of those misappropriated quotes, but he said that I do not always appreciate being taught, but I'm always willing to learn, or something along those lines. You know what I mean. And so if you enjoy the episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, I don't know, do whatever you want. If you want to leave an iTunes review, you can go to actualfluency.com/iTunes. And don't forget also, just a last thing here, if you want to support the show with a few bucks a month, then you can go to actualfluency.com/support, which is going to take you to the Patreon page. I try to do Patreon events once in a while, including posting the episodes well in advance, usually more than 24 hours, sometimes just a few hours before. But go check it out, support the show, and enjoy it. Yeah, first and foremost, of course, welcome to the podcast. It's been a long time coming. And
thank you very much.
Do you want to give the listeners a little introduction to yourselves? Like, how did you get into languages and, chose it as a career and everything? Let's go back to the beginning.
Sure. Okay, but a quick story, I suppose, because otherwise it will take ages, as with most people on your show, right? So I started with English and German at school, like everybody else here in Slovakia. It was just normal classes at school, but I soon figured out that I liked the languages very much, so I started learning them by myself as well. And then the breakthrough moment came at the university when I was learning Spanish. I took an extra class at the university, and it didn't work out very well. I didn't like the teacher, the lessons, and anything else. So I figured once that I have the book, I can just continue with it by myself. And I did a lot of additional activities, like I downloaded the Harry Potter book as an ebook and an audiobook. And then I just listened to it and read it at the same time every day for 20 minutes. And then just magic happens, And I suddenly speak Spanish after half a year, and I couldn't believe it. And that was the breakthrough moment when I realized that, okay, if I put a lot of work into it in a short period of time, it can actually work, and I can learn the language much faster. And so then after that, every 2 years, more or less, I took on another language. And I spent a lot of time learning it until I spoke it up to a level where I was quite happy with it. I was, let's say, fluent. Yeah, that's the magical word for you. And yeah, that's what I keep doing ever since. And I'm working on my 8th language right now, which is Russian.
Awesome. And what do you think were the main differences going back to, like you said you had some success in languages and then Spanish was very different. What was it that Spanish was not doing that the other languages had been doing for you at that time?
Yeah, I think the way I was learning Spanish, the official way, at the university, having a lesson with a teacher once a week, was just so bad and so inefficient that it couldn't be otherwise. If I hadn't learned by myself, I wouldn't have spoken any Spanish at all. So I would have just given up on that. Whereas my English and German classes at school were quite good, and I learned quite a lot in them as well. So I guess this was the main difference.
So just a quality teacher or syllabus or just generally?
Yeah, I mean, there were 25 people in the class, and we met once a week. So
wow.
You can imagine how well we learned Spanish, right?
Yeah, I guess nobody learned Spanish that day.
No, of course not. But I realized that, I mean, this cannot possibly work, It's just once a week. There's so many people. We do such stupid things in the lessons. Like, this cannot work. This cannot be. I will not be able to speak Spanish. So then I realized I need to do something else. And I'm very glad for this experience now in retrospect.
Right.
Because it's helped me a lot in life.
Well, that's great. Yeah, that's really great. Actually, it's funny. I just listened to an episode of Tim Ferriss's podcast where he talks about how very successful people always say that a struggle was necessary or a kind of a problem led to a solution. And if you ask those people, would you do the same again? They would all say yes. Because whereas some other people might say, well, I would have preferred just to learn Spanish the first time, but actually it turned out much better. And of course, you turned it into a career as well. Can you talk a little about that?
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, that's why I'm very grateful for that, for this moment, for the bad experience with the teacher and the lessons, because I realized this is not how languages can be taught. I mean, for anyone, not just for me. And then I realized, but this is how it's done, actually. Everybody in the world learns the languages more or less in the same way. They go to a course, they do it once or twice a week, they use one single book, they do a few exercises, they act like they actually learn something, but it doesn't work at all. So I realized that you need to put a lot of more time into it, but how to do it? Because the lessons are always constructed in a way where the teacher is supposed to teach you, right? This is the main thing that we always expect. Like, well, he's called a teacher, right?
Yeah.
So he's supposed to spoon feed you the language, and all you need to do is pay for the lesson, come there for the lesson once or twice a week, and then the teacher does the job, right? Because he's a good teacher, so he should. And then you come home, and then you suddenly speak the language. But then you see so many people who are struggling, or they're just so desperate because it doesn't work. And I was thinking about these things for years. And there was a book that I read which really helped me understand the eureka moment. It's called From English Teacher to Learner Coach, an amazing book, really, which showed me that language learning should be kind of like the Weight Watchers groups. Where people, if people lose weight and they're in a group, they let's say they meet once a week, Tuesdays, but they don't lose weight on Tuesday at 6 p.m. when they meet. They lose weight during the whole week, and when they meet, that's when they just discuss it and motivate each other and support each other, right? And the idea of that book is this is how language teaching should be done as well. So the teacher should turn into a learner coach, and I really loved that idea. I was like, yes, this is exactly what I believe as well. And this is how the idea of language mentoring started to build up.
Awesome. And we'll get back into that in just a moment. And of course, we met at the gathering for the first time, which was actually a funny story. But the first gathering, you talked about interpreting.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people out there are very interested in, I know all these languages. I'm a language genius, like people who are not me. They want to know what can they use the languages for, and I wonder if you just wanted to take a minute or two to talk about being an interpreter as a career way.
Of course. Well, yeah, that's what I studied. I work as a professional interpreter, basically, even though I don't do that very much now anymore. I concentrate on my other project. Yeah, I mean, it's a great thing to do. It's an amazing job, but it's not like, okay, I'm a polyglot, speak a lot of languages. What can I do? Oh, okay, interpreting. I'll try it. Let's try a job, an assignment tomorrow. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. You really need to train to be an interpreter, and I think many people underappreciate it. So they suppose they can do it much faster. But just the idea of simultaneous interpreting, where you listen at the same time, you speak at the same time, is not something you can just do. I mean, there are some people who have better prerequisites for that, who are maybe a little bit more talented, because I think talent does play a certain role in interpreting. But you still need to train a lot. I mean, I know because I trained interpreters for 4 years while doing my PhD in Bratislava, and I could tell, the students, when you give them the first assignment, you show them a text, maybe you read it or you play a little recording, and you let them interpret. They find out that, okay, this is difficult. I need to practice this. I need to learn how to listen at the same time and then speak and then form the sentences so that they actually have an ending, because most people, they will just stop in the middle of the sentence and then process another piece of information. So this is what's difficult about it.
Yeah.
But I want to say that it cannot be trained. I mean, I think people can learn it even by themselves, but it does take a lot of practice. And interpreting is not something you can do for any of your languages. Like I speak several languages up to certain levels, but I only basically interpreted English mostly. A little bit of German, a tiny little bit of Polish, but mostly English, because your vocabulary needs to be very vast and you need to be able to think quickly in that language. You cannot just, if you're on a B2 level, forget about it. That's not for interpreting for sure.
Well, that's cool, and I want to get back into the levels in a second as well, but you said something interesting, and that was the idea that we can't just equate language skill with interpreting skill. And I think it was Amir, I don't know if you know him, from Kazakhstan, who told me that if you want to see how good or bad you can be at interpreting, try to read the news, or basically repeat what the guy in the news saying in the language he's speaking. So just from English to English. And he's
shadowing exercise.
Yeah, and I was like, yeah, that's pretty difficult. So I can only imagine, how hard it must be without training to just go in and expect to speak English after somebody is speaking Slovak or Spanish or Czech or whatever,
Yeah, exactly.
But
it's a very good exercise, though. I mean, shadowing is perfect. I think both for language learning and for interpreters. I often did it with my students, and we started with Slovak into Slovak, right? So the same language. And then I let them do it with English or another foreign language. And it was like, oh, this is difficult.
Yeah.
And even the better one is where you paraphrase it. So you have to change every single part of the sentence to have the same meaning, but say it in different words. Because this is what interpreting is really about,
Yeah.
You don't work with words. It's not like many people imagine that interpreters are these automatic Google translators, which just switch on and they go word after word and they translate it. But it doesn't work like that. You always work with ideas. And then you say it in different words. So for that, you need a really big vocabulary in your working languages.
Yeah, and also there are some structural problems in some languages that just make that almost impossible, I guess. I mean, if you're interpreting from German into English, and the German person is speaking like a huge sentence, it's impossible to translate on a word-by-word basis, because you're going to have to wait for the verb for 10 years.
Yeah, simultaneous interpreting from German is quite tricky sometimes. But there are strategies that you can go around it, but you need to learn them and practice them actively, consciously.
Well, great. I hope that we inspired some people out there to go down that route, because I definitely seen from your experience that it can really open up some doors that you didn't expect. And
it's awesome. It's an awesome job. So if anyone is interested, I really suggest that you look at the university courses that are offered nearby, and then apply yourself to the studies for 1 or 2 years preferably. And then, the job is really interesting, because you get to meet a lot of interesting people. Sometimes you get to meet really, really interesting speakers, like Tony Robbins or someone like that. That's one of the moments where you think, oh my God, I'm so blessed with this job, because I wouldn't possibly meet this person ever. So
yeah, Tony Robbins seminar, I guess, starts at something like $5,000 to $10,000 a person. So if you get the chance to actually come and meet him, that's huge. Going back into just general language learning, and I guess we can talk about language mentoring as well. But one of the interesting things for me is looking at how to get from intermediate or at least upper beginner into the really good levels, like the interpreting, the C1, C2s. And as a sort of beginner to the whole thing, it seems like there's a lot of material from how to say, the weather is nice and the beginner levels, but it seems that the materials get less and less as you progress. Do you have any sort of general strategies and ideas on how to go over that hump? Because I think a lot of people can get to the touristy level, the order at the restaurant, or there's enough help out there, but then they hit that intermediate wall. How do we get really good at a language? Because as somebody with a history in interpreting and still doing it, then you must be one of the best to ask this question.
Yeah, I think I also deal with this question quite a lot when I'm trying to help people how to learn languages. And this is, I think this is exactly the point where you don't really need a teacher anymore.
Right.
Many people do need a teacher at the beginning because they don't have the motivation, the perseverance, etc. But once that you're able to read most of the text, you understand 80% of what's written in any text, then you're good to go. And what you need then, I believe, is four things. It's like the four pillars of my system. Well, first of all, you need to figure out a way how this can be fun for you. So I really honestly believe that people cannot learn languages well if they do something without fun. Mm-hmm. You don't need, it doesn't need to be fun like, lol fun, normal fun. But you need to enjoy the activities you do. So whatever you do, make sure that you like it. If you don't, then just put the book away and put the recordings away and just find something else.
Right.
The second thing is you need to do a lot of it. And I think this is the crucial point because many people think that they can just, read a few texts in the textbook and then they will, be on the B2 level. But I think the good knowledge of a language comes from vast material. So you need to read a lot of books, listen to a lot of recordings, a lot of them, and speak a lot of lessons. Well, spend a lot of hours speaking with people, practicing, like with tutors, etc. And not only do you need to do a lot of it, but also very frequently. So it doesn't help if you do it once a week and you spend 8 hours with it because your brain needs time to process it and to sleep on it, etc. So what I suggest to do is to do it every day in little bits and pieces. So that gives us fun, quantity, frequency, and then the last one is a system.
Right.
I think that if you have a system, if you have a plan, if you know how to do things, if you know why you're doing this and how you're going to achieve your goals, then you're good to go. All you need to do is to spend the time with it, with the activities that you enjoy doing. So it's not a nuisance, you just enjoy it. And then you can really very easily get into the level where you're comfortable with the language.
Right. I think that's good. And the systematizing obviously is it's a protection against our own overwhelmedness. If you have a system, then you don't need to worry about your self-discipline because you could just kind of do it.
Exactly.
I think another problem is that it's not easy, but it's going from, let's say, A0 to A2 is quite a lot less effort compared to going from just B1 to B2.
Exactly.
And it just gets harder and harder, or the material you need is vaster and vaster, and I don't know if that's a word, but now it is.
It also gets more interesting because you don't need to work with a simplified text anymore. You can just use anything,
Yes.
And this is something that that was another breakthrough moment for me when I realized that if you don't understand something at the beginning, just give it time and keep doing it for a longer time, and then it will just come. This is how I started watching, for example, Sex and the City in French, in French. And I watched it all the series before in English, so I knew more or less what it would be about. But after the first episode, I didn't understand anything.
Really?
I was just lost, oh no, I thought I spoke a little bit French, but after half a year or so, and I didn't understand almost anything. But I said, okay, I'll just give it more time and frequency. Every day I'll watch an episode. And then after, 7, 8, 10 episodes, suddenly things started to make sense. So this is what I always recommend to everyone. Work with a material you like, something you're interested in, and then do it every day. And don't get discouraged if it doesn't work, because it never works, because you don't have the vocabulary, you're not used to the voices of the actors, you're not used to you don't know what they will mention.
Yeah.
But once you get the idea, then that helps you a lot.
Yeah, and they don't use the annoying dubbing system, do they? They use the straight dubbing. So there's
Yes. Yes. Not like Polish or Russian.
Ugh, it's like it's so confusing. I'm watching House with Russian dubbing, and it's just, I mean, it's just so difficult.
Yeah, but you can used to it, right?
Well, you get used to it where it's not annoying, but the problem is my brain will, I guess, forever kind of prefer English. So it's listening out for the English instead of paying attention to the Russian.
Right.
And it's like, it's really tricky because when you watch TV, you just kind of zone out, right? You don't watch TV actively. So I feel like I need to do that, and it can be quite exhausting, actually. Whereas if I'm watching something, with Hungarian dubs, the ones I've seen, they were dubbed like the French one. And there's no thinking because you don't have a choice. There's no subtle English in the background.
Yeah, I agree. It's easier for sure.
So I don't understand who came up with that. Russian people must be geniuses because they can just zone that other thing out. But yeah, definitely actually knowing the story and knowing some of the lines that the actors would be saying is very helpful, I think. But of course, I also try to watch a comedy show. I also like Basledny's Magikan. I don't know if you've seen any of it. It's hilarious. And it's actually.
Well, I recommend Kuchnia to
you. Yeah. Some people have said that to me, and I didn't get a chance to check it out yet. But maybe when I reach the next season of one of the other shows, I'll swap it in and see. What happens, because there's no dubbing there, so that's good.
No, it's an original series, and it shows you part of the Russian culture as well. It's really well done. Kuchnia is my favorite Russian series for sure.
Well, you've sold me out. I'm gonna have to give it a try. But
one thing I wanted to say, just to add, like if some people have a problem understanding the first episodes because they have no idea what the series is about or something, what I recommend doing is just check the short description of that episode on Wikipedia, because if you just go list off the name of the series, episodes, you're going to find it for sure. Like list of Friends episodes, for example. And then you just look, I do it, for example, okay, I watched an episode in French, let's say, a series that I didn't really understand it. And right after that, it was like, what were they talking about? What was this all about? I mean, you understand from the reactions, she was happy about it, he was not, he was angry, etc. But then you look at it like, oh, he was breaking up with her. Oh my God, that makes so much sense now. And sometimes I watch back part of the episode and it suddenly falls into place. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Sometimes you can get completely lost and be like, what is this about? I don't get it.
Yeah, exactly.
I did it with my Russian tutor, actually. It's a recommended activity as well, where she said, go and watch 10 minutes of this show. It was something about a ship. I think it was called The Ship, actually. Well, how can it be called The Ship if it's in Russian? It probably wasn't called The Ship. I'm probably thinking of something else. But it was like people on a ship, and it's like doomsday. And when I went over the episode with her, I would have an idea of what it was based mostly on what I saw. And then she would tell me, but Chris, this is what happened. And I was like, interesting. I didn't really get that. But yeah, now that you say
Did I watch the correct one?
Yeah, you mean this episode?
Right.
That's pretty funny. But I think one of the most important things that you said also was just you have to spend the time. Like you can get to a touristy level in 3 months, and you can do that well and understand a lot for your level. But if you want mastery in a language, which I think C1, C2 would be considered as, there's no substitute for hard work. There
is no shortcut. Yeah.
No, you just have to put the work in.
I also think it's very rewarding to spend the time, because otherwise you lose it.
Yeah.
If you just spend 2 or 3 months with a language, I saw some people do it for the Polyglot Conference, for example. They learn some Greek, and now they're excited to learn some Icelandic, which is nice. But I think they're honestly losing that time, because in the long run, you're not going to remember anything from that language if you don't use it anymore.
Yeah.
But I believe there is a point where you get when you learn a lot, and then you get, and for me personally, I think it's a comfortable B2 level. Once you get on that level, you're not going to lose it. I mean, of course, you're going to get it's going to get a little bit rusty, and you need to refresh up on it, etc. But you're not going to completely lose the language. Whereas if you don't get to that comfortable point, then, I mean, too bad. I mean, good that you enjoy the activity of learning the language, but you're not going to be able to use it in 2 years for sure.
Right. And I think the activity itself is just very rewarding. It's a brain activity, it's good to keep you brain active, and
Yeah, I
you
love
can
it too.
see your improvement. And if you go to all these polyglot events, you also meet people who are doing the same thing. You can exchange notes. You can even speak to them a little bit. And I did that. I think that was one of the first time I did that recently. And I'm a beginner for most of this, but I see a lot of people go to something like the gathering or the conference, and they practice their languages. And I know that I don't do that very much at all. Like, I speak a bit of German, but since we're usually in Berlin, it's like people are like, yeah, of course everyone speaks German, So I spoke some Russian here in Greece, in Thessaloniki, with a Greek guy. And so that was very exciting to kind of be two people who weren't very good at it. Like, he was better than me, but we were both pretty bad. So that was kind of supportive, we could... Because when you're speaking to a native speaker, it can get very daunting, because you feel like if you're not good enough, you feel like you're kind of wasting their time a little bit, or testing their patience, and if you're good enough, you get to a point, of course, where it's natural conversation. But then again, you need to be ridiculously high level to have a meaningful conversation as you would have in English. So there's a little sweet spot, I guess, where you need to be good enough to keep the conversation going. But if you're not, unless you're really good, then you might as well speak English. So
yeah, well, it depends. I mean, I'm either in this practice mode or use the language mode. So I prefer myself to get into the level where I can use it more or less comfortably. It can be a B1. I mean, I'm able to say things in very, very simple terms, and then have the conversation. But fluency is very important to me, because if you have a conversation with a native speaker or someone who speaks the language well, and it's painful for them to wait for you to finish the sentences, and you misunderstand each other half of the time, it's not really a conversation, is it? Yeah. But you see, I think this is actually one of the keys to learning a language, and I'm now trying to figure out a way how to help my students and my clients understand this, because like when I was learning Spanish, for example, we were out with some Spanish friends. I met a lot of Spanish Erasmus students, and I wanted to tell them, because they were a little hungry, and I wanted to suggest that we go into a place which was nearby, a shopping center, and they had a lot of restaurants in a little restaurant corner, and I wanted to suggest we go there and we pick some food. And the only thing I was able to say to suggest this was, en esa casa hay mucha comida. It's like, in that house there is a lot of food, which is a very, very simple Spanish.
Right.
But it worked.
It works,
it worked. It served the purpose, and the girls started to laugh, but they understood the gist. And we went there and we picked some food, And this is how I was communicating at that time. My Spanish was not good enough. I was not able to say it in a better way. So you need to make it as simple as possible, but keep the fluency. And this is what I try to do.
And that's also using what you have instead of waiting until much later and just delaying it. But it's very tough. I mean, for me, definitely doing that, what you just did there, it's really tough for me. I always run through the sentence 5 times in my head, and if I don't really like it, I don't say it. And
right.
So that's my sort of perfectionist problem there. But I think in general,
that can stand in the way.
Yeah, you have to make more mistakes, I guess. It's a good tip. But branching into the idea of language mentoring, do you want to just tell us the elevator pitch for your activity and sort of when did you consider to turn it into a more serious practice?
Yeah, well, it's something that I've been doing for quite a long time, trying to help people learn languages, because they started to ask me, of course, someone speaks more languages, like, oh, how do you do it? Tell me more about it. And I realized people don't really understand that, they really need to spend time learning the language. So this is basically my mission, trying to help people learn languages by themselves. This is what language mentoring is about. And it's not done in a way that languages are taught in schools and language schools, but rather the way that polyglots learn languages.
Right.
So, I mean, we actually have a very similar job in this sense, because you also try to figure out how polyglots learn languages.
Sure.
And your podcast, by the way, helped me a lot to understand that as well. So thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you. That's nice of you.
And I also recommend it to anyone. So I hope you have a lot of new listeners because of that. And anyway, so try to take the best out of what polyglots do, because polyglots are not so special people. They just do things differently. And I think anyone can apply those principles. And the 4 pillars that I've mentioned already, it's something that is, I think, the core of the way polyglots learn languages.
Right.
I believe that.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Yeah.
So this is what I try to do. I help people do that, and then I motivate them to stick with it, stick with a plan, like to create a learning plan, which is totally individual for themselves, for their own needs. So, for example, I believe if someone wants to be able to speak the language, they don't necessarily need to be able to write it.
No.
I don't think people should practice all the skills at the same time. I think they should pick some priorities and concentrate on them. You know?
Yeah.
And then you see a lot of improvement in that area in a short period of time, and that motivates you to continue and to continue learning. Because I think one of the most important things that supports success is success.
Right.
So once you see success in little periods, then you want to continue with with bigger ones.
And that's, I mean, we could get into a whole range of ideas in terms of increasing motivation, but I guess having a person that you're kind of accountable to is a good first step, and that's what you provide to your students. And people can do this for themselves as well. They can find partners in crime who are both learning Russian, or maybe they have some pen pal or international friend or something that you can just say. For instance, I Skype every week with my friend Tom from France. And, we're not learning the same languages, and we're not the same. We don't have the same strategies. We don't use the same materials, but we just kind of meet up every week and just say, last week I did this, and this week I plan to do this.
Awesome.
And that's just basic accountability. And I think,
Perfect.
And I think that's the biggest change, actually, because people don't need to learn languages. At least most people don't. Most people are inspired to learn languages on a bit of a whim, where it just, it could be fun to try. And then...
Oh, you think so?
Yeah, I think that, certainly speaking of numbers, but the people who are successful are obviously people who are very interested or very obsessed.
Yeah, I mean, polyglots are a special group, right?
Exactly, yeah. But I'm thinking of people who like, just one day they're like, it could be nice, which is a common sentence said by the outsiders. And I just think that they do it on a sort of a whim, and they don't realize that if there are no consequences to not doing it, then it's very hard to do it.
Yeah, I think this is maybe more typical of the community of people really interested in languages, but my goal is to help people who are not that crazy about languages, or not that interested in them, but they need them for some reason.
Like one language or many languages? Do you differentiate?
I usually work with people who need one or two languages. So in Slovakia, everybody wants to speak English, of course, which is still a big issue. Like, people are not that good at it. They cannot use it professionally, so they want to improve, but they're not necessarily very interested in the language itself. So what I'm trying to do is to help them find the little things they could get interested in and then work on them.
Right.
So for example, I realized that some people just love working with apps, and they're just crazy about it. So I help them work with Anki or another app, to learn vocabulary. But then some people, you show them the app and they go like, nah, this is not really my thing. I mean, looking at the screen again, no. So I tell them about the gold list method, for example.
Yeah.
Okay, you can write it in person. I mean, you can write it in hand. So that's I think this is what everybody needs, like an individual approach, like kind of find the best pieces of all the methods that are available out there.
Right.
And then if someone is not that crazy about languages, what they need is a system and a plan. So once you create a habit, I mean, you know it very well yourself, habits are really powerful.
Yeah.
Once you have it, you just stick to it. And once you have a plan, like, okay, I'm just going to do this for 2 months, and then at the end of the 2 months, I'm going to decide what to do. That's doable.
Yeah.
Whereas if someone decides, okay, I'm going to learn French now, it's like, oh my God, that's a long way. That's just too much work. And after the first month, they usually quit. So I think this is what helps, to have a system and to realize, okay, I'm just going to do this for 2 months. Then I'll see what I do next.
Right. And what would you say are the kind of, do you need a teacher and a mentor, or can the mentor sometimes be the teacher?
Yeah, I don't think people really need teachers. Most people.
Right.
At the beginning, it can be useful, but the problem is, I mean, a teacher. How do we define a teacher? This is the question. Because I think a good teacher is more of a tutor, a guide, a mentor. You can actually call it in any way a coach. any way you like. But I don't think the teacher should teach the stuff. They shouldn't spoon feed you, and most of all, they shouldn't explain stuff to you which you're not really interested in.
Right.
So I think this is one of the main mistakes that we do in our language teaching, that we tell people about grammar which their brain hasn't even figured out that exists.
Yeah.
And this is what, for example, ASIMIL and SIMIL courses are based on. First you notice stuff, and then when you're curious about it, then they tell you about it.
Yes.
But not really like, okay, this is the future tense, we do that, you know, all the declination forms. They tell you, hey, look, this is the future tense, so just notice it.
It's
and later
strange.
when you go like, okay, tell me, you know, you can work with a teacher, tutor, whatever, and you say, okay, tell me how do I say this in the future tense? And how do I say it for the second person, etc. And this is when you can actually learn to use the language because you are already curious. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And curiosity is one of my defining characteristics of successful polyglots. I think that people who learn a lot of languages are naturally curious. They want to know, what does that word mean? What does that ending mean? What does that, grammar define? And I think I would like to transform. Oh, well, I mean, that's a bit of an ambitious plan, but I'd like to make language teaching better, because I think we need language teaching in school in some form or another. I mean, I'd like it to be more autonomous as well, but I think that for people, let's say kids who are maybe age 10, 8 or something, I don't know when the most of the world starts a second language, but it's probably around there, and I just think that they need to be guided more than, say, adults. But it would be nice still to try and make some improvements to the old way of doing it, because I think the old way is kind of a linear progression. You're kind of learning from zero, and you add step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Whereas I think speech is more of a puzzle where you connect the dots in a way. And sometimes you use this area of the puzzle a lot, and sometimes you use something over here. But you can do a lot, which Benny Lewis, for instance, has exemplified. Like, you can do a lot with very few words, and you can do a lot with very little study. And likewise, you can spend, let's say, 4 years on a university degree and speak nothing. Just maybe you can read a poem or something. But if somebody says, "How are you?" they're like, "I don't know." 4 years later, and it would be nice if the teaching was more relevant. But I suppose speaking of relevancy, that's not so relevant to mentoring. But
well, it is actually.
It's an important point.
This
anyway.
is one of my missions as well. I would like to change the way languages are taught in schools and in general. And this is actually what is almost, it's already happening in Slovakia in little ways, because in the summer I worked with English teachers, and I wanted to introduce the whole idea of language mentoring to them. But I didn't do it like, okay, this is a course how you can help your students learn, but this is a course for you yourselves, how you can improve your English, how you can work on your language. And they got so passionate about it.
Yeah.
They were really eager. They spent a lot of time working on their English. They loved it. And now they're passing it on to their students. And I have a few teachers in the group who actually tried it with students of 10, 11 years old, and it works really well, because you motivate people to learn by themselves, to not just wait what happens in the lessons. And then these people notice that they are getting better, and the teachers said, well, the results were great. The students who spent a lot of time learning English outside of the lessons, like watching Peppa Pig or whatever, just cartoons and on YouTube, they were a lot better in 2 months than the students who just came to the lessons and did the homework.
Of course.
So it's definitely something that can be done, and this is exactly my goal and my mission, to explore it and to find the best ways that people can learn languages by themselves. I believe in the power of that so much.
Me too. Well, in fact, I believe people can learn anything they want.
Yes.
It's very tough to become like the best in the world at anything, let's say speaking Russian or playing the violin. But I think anyone can get in the top, 1% or 0.1% or whatever, and really enjoy most of the benefits.
Yes.
But we should do a non-profit. We should create a non-profit for how to improve school learning across the world. That would be fun.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
That's our little charity.
It's a huge project, though.
Well, I mean, we don't have to do it tomorrow.
Right.
We can work on it slowly. But it's interesting for me because I think that the early experiences with languages really define your future. So if you get a bad language experience, let's say at English in grade 2 or 3 or 4, I think it's very hard for you as an adult to come back and try it again, or even as a young adult. And so I think we would improve the interconnection between countries and cultures greatly if we just open people's eyes to different languages at an earlier age than is currently happening. Because like if you're in, let's say you're in Russia or Hungary, maybe everything is dubbed, you don't need foreign languages. And maybe that foreign language in school is totally boring. It's a teacher with like a super local accent. So it doesn't really feel that exciting, and you just want to skip every class. And, you have the outliers once in a while, right? But generally, I think if we can improve that foundation, then we can improve the whole puzzle, hopefully. Who knows?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is also one thing I like to stress to people: learn in a way which they can use in practice, which is interesting, which is relevant to them, right? Yeah. And this is why I don't think working with one book for every student, reading the same text that someone wrote, a teacher who has no idea about these kids, reading it doesn't make much sense. So that's why I think people should read stuff that interests them in person.
Yeah.
And these are amazing examples of people whose, let's say, their English is not on a very good level, but they're really interested in, photography. And they can read really complex text about photography and they understand it.
Yeah.
Where I wouldn't understand it, So this is because they're interested in, and that's what I supporting people. Try to find the materials you're interested in, and you'll understand so much more, so much better.
Yeah.
And this could of course be applied to kids as well. I mean, trying to give them texts that are interesting for them, and then make them learn it and read it in their free time. Sure.
Yeah, and of course now we have the internet and the digital world where we can update books all the time. So for instance, if I wrote a book for a new English student who's maybe 10 years old, maybe I'd write about Pokemon Go or something, which is a huge hit. And then 10 years from now, we could update it to talk about whatever the latest craze is, So just having those connections would be very beneficial. So let's see what we can do in that space over the next period of time.
Well, this is the thing you mentioned. I mean, having the internet, that's a huge thing I believe for all this philosophy that we're talking about. Because I'm not sure how people learned languages 20 or 30 years ago. I honestly admire them. If they only had books and some, recorded tapes or something, that took a lot of hard work, which was probably not always that much fun. But today you have so many websites where you learn English for free, so many apps and programs. I think the problem now is to find your way around them and to pick one and stick with it, because there's too many. So this is also one of my ideas to help people kind of find themselves in the labyrinth of materials and just create a plan and stick with it, and then do it until you speak the language fluently. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, I couldn't say it better myself. So that's great. Well, let's now move on to one of our favorite events of the year, which is the Polyglot Gathering.
Yay.
And of course, as you said before we started recording, the next one is going to be even more special. Because it's going to be in your neck of the woods. So you're actually going to organize the 4th or 5th? It's
that's
the 4th.
The 4th one, yes.
In Bratislava next year. So
yeah, that's big news.
Yeah.
People don't know it. Most people don't know it yet, or maybe, I don't know, your listeners, if they caught it.
Well, now they know.
Yay, that's right.
Now they know.
So, it's going to be in Bratislava.
It's going to be awesome.
It's going to start on the 31st of May. It's going to be the welcome evening, and then up to 4th of June. And it's going to be an awesome event. I really can't wait to have all the polyglots come to Bratislava and Slovakia and to explore the country, and to have another great event. I mean, the polyglot gatherings are awesome. We all know that. Anyone who's been knows that they're really, really nice, and it's one of my favorite events of the year. So I'm really excited about this.
Well, I'm really excited about it too. Of course, I love Berlin, and I love having it the same place is a great idea, but I must say, going to a new place is also a great opportunity to see a new culture and language as well.
Yeah, and I think this will be very interesting to many people. I also love Berlin. I love the place where it was held, but I suppose for people who were there for all 3 times or maybe twice, they will maybe even welcome the possibility to get to know something else.
Sure.
And the venue where it will be held in Slovakia, the Economics University, is really cool. It's an amazing building. Everything is huge and spacey there, so there's a lot of places to sit down on the grass and just have a picnic or whatever. So I think people will love that.
Right.
And also just to get to know Bratislava, Slovakia, many people don't know much about it, right? Many people plan to come, but haven't so far, right, Chris?
Yeah. Oops. I was there for a very short time.
Right, but I mean, hopefully you'll make it for longer now, and I'll be glad to show you Bratislava, because I'm really excited about it. I love to show foreigners my country and my city, and I think there's a lot to discover here.
Yeah, I'm always excited about going to new places, and the gathering, for those people who might not have been to one yet, or maybe read about it. I mean, I wrote a lot about it, and a lot of the other bloggers also did. But basically just a 4-day language polyglot event, I guess we can call it. You don't have to be a polyglot to come or enjoy it. And for me, it's just pure like inspiration, enjoyment, fun, just hanging out, whilst there are also interesting presentations going on, and anyone can present, and you get topics on such a wide variety of themes. You get anything from how to learn a language to an interpreting workshop, which was people still talk about your first interpreting workshop.
That's
It's
so
a
nice.
funny story, which I guess I can share. The first year, that was when you did it, right? That was the first year?
No, the second.
That was the second year, okay.
Yeah.
So the second year, I never really go to that many talks, because they're usually posted online afterwards, and I like to just kind of socialize, hang out, and there are a lot of people who come out to these events who I don't get the chance to, first of all, see very often in person, but also talk to online even, because they have kids, or they're busy, they're working in a company or something. So I don't usually go to many talks, but that year, everyone was just so excited about this interpreting workshop that had been full for a long time, and people were like, wow, this is interpreting, and Lydia was like the greatest ever, and so you were kind of blown up to this mythical figure, and I was like, oh wow, Lydia, she was really impressive, and she speaks. Everyone was saying how you speak like tons of languages, and you're a really good interpreter as well. And so I didn't really.
See, this is very interesting. That's the mythical figure, probably, because I don't think I speak the languages so well.
Right.
I mean, I'm not like, I couldn't interpret all the other languages. I don't think my skills are particularly good. I mean, at least in comparison to other polyglots. For me, the polyglot gathering was a very humbling experience, because I was like, oh my God, wow, these people are so amazing. They speak so many languages and they speak them so well. But it's interesting that you're saying that. I believe it's because they found the content interesting, because it was something different.
Yeah.
I did a polyglot. I did an interpreting workshop and an interpreting lecture, which can be found on YouTube. But the workshop was very different, because I made them do exercises that I do with my students, and they practice interpreting. And Daniel Luis was one of the students there, by the way. He also enjoyed it. And after the workshop, he said, "Okay, now I'm finally convinced that I shouldn't be an interpreter. I shouldn't follow that career."
That's
and now
funny.
I know why. Yeah.
But it's so funny, because I didn't get the chance to meet you that year, because I didn't go to the workshop because it was full, and I didn't go to the interpreting lecture because I know, like Benny found out, that I'm not really, I don't think I want to, and I don't think I really, I mean, I only spoke English, German, and Danish at that time, so I thought, well, there are lots of people competing for that anyway, so I didn't even know who you were. And then the next year we met by coincidence. You came up and said you really love the podcast, and I was like, oh, thank you, that's really nice of you to say. And then you said, I'm Lydia, and I was like, Lydia? That Lydia? So I was really excited to meet you there. And
oh, really? I was excited to meet you. That's
well,
nice to hear.
I mean, the feeling is mutual. It's just a funny story, because we could have very easily met the first year, but just because of, I don't know, you just seemed like you were such a great polyglot, so I would feel out of my depth, but yeah, that's a funny story from
That's
what
really
happened
interesting.
there.
I had no idea. Someone else mentioned it to me. Like sometimes it happens. Like in the last gathering, someone met me like, "Oh my God, you're Lydia! I saw your talk. It was so cool." It's like, "Oh really? I'm
there
so
you
glad.
go.
It's awesome."
They're going to talk about that presentation for years to come.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. But I hope to, I hope to create other presentations that I will also talk about, or maybe they will talk about the gathering, which we are trying to make as good as possible and really up to all standards. So I'm I hope that people enjoy the gathering next year, and they will talk about that. And
Yeah, well, I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will. So how are you going to kind of copy the same what do you call it, the template from last year's, or are you trying to kind of reimagine it, or what's the
thing is, we are still closely cooperating with Judith and Chuck. It's still, it's their baby, basically, the Polyglot Gathering, and they asked us to do this in Bratislava, so we're closely cooperating, and we want to keep the spirit, because I love the Polyglot Gathering. I love all the activities which are meant to put the community together and make us hang out together as much as possible. So we are doing all we can to keep that, for sure. But we are also introducing a few new things. So, for example, right after the gathering, there will be a few 1-day and 2-day trips that you can take in Slovakia, so that you can get to know our country. Because we don't only want to show people Bratislava. Bratislava is not Slovakia.
Right.
There's so much more to offer. Like, there's castles and chateaus and ruins and caves and mountains. Like, Slovakia is really beautiful. So we want to show polyglots a little bit of that. And we also think it's a great thing if you met some people in the gathering, then you hang out for 2 more days. On a trip, you go by bus together and you stay in the same place. So this could be prolonging of the gathering and of the whole community.
So the biggest, well, not the biggest, but one of my favorite things about the current gathering is that you kind of stay so close to the venue.
Yeah.
Are you going to make that happen again, or are we going to have to make some compromises there?
Yes, there will be some compromises, but we were trying to make it possible for everyone to stay in one place. Unfortunately, this is not possible in Bratislava, or it's not possible at the venue. But we are now working on figuring out particular hotels and some places which will be like the polyglot hubs.
Okay.
So we will suggest to people to stay in those hotels, and we're also trying to get the best prices, negotiating with the hotels. And also there will be Airbnb places, but we want to make the communication of the participants as easy as possible. So it's not like you need to figure out your things for yourself, but hey, there's a group of people who would like to find a flatmate, a roommate, etc. Maybe you guys want to get together, etc. And another thing is this venue is really cool, and it gives a lot of space to just hang out very comfortably. I mean, there's even bean bags, you can just lie on them in the corridors. It's really cool. And outside, you can just sit on the grass. At the beginning of June, weather is usually beautiful in Slovakia. So people will not necessarily stay together in the place they sleep, but they can hang out a lot together at the venue. There is a huge canteen where we can all gather for meals, etc. So I think that the spirit will definitely be kept.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. That's for me. It's not necessarily that you're in the same building, but it's just if there are some kind of social events or hubs, as you say, that people know about, then the kind of socializing will happen anyway, And maybe there's less noise in your around your sleeping areas.
Yeah, that would be nice for sure.
Yeah, it's like not too much sleep that week. I can tell people who are thinking about coming. So if you definitely need your 8 or 9 hours, it's very unlikely, but it's worth it, I would say. Yeah,
well, what people sometimes do is then to miss some of the talks or some of the time to get together with the other people. But I don't recommend it. I recommend giving up sleep. In those days as well. That's much better. I mean, you can catch up later, right?
Yeah, no problem. So, and I guess the last note about the gathering is that if people are sitting out there saying, oh, I have this great idea for a talk or a presentation, can I come and present it? And I guess the answer is, of course, yes. You can apply to be a speaker.
Exactly, yeah. We're going to make it very easy for people to apply. On the website, there will be a button, I want to present something, so then you just fill out a simple questionnaire, and we'll let people know in case, I suppose there will be a bigger interest, because the interest in the Polyglot Gathering is growing every year. Yeah. So we need to make sure that we have enough space for all the speakers, but we're probably going to have 4 speakers at the same time now, because the premises enable that. And we suppose that there will be more people interested. I mean, in the last gathering, I don't know if you know, there was 350 people, but 1 month before the event, the tickets were sold out.
Yeah.
It was just not possible to come after that. and which was a pity because I believe many people were waiting to see if they can maybe get some days off from the work, etc. So now this will not be that limited because the premises are really huge, the venue is really vast, so more people can come if they're interested, and yeah, we will most probably have 4 lines of speakers.
Yeah, so we're nearing the conference in size, I guess. We had about 500 or something in Greece, maybe a little bit less, so maybe we can rival that. Not that there's any competition, but
no way. I mean, it's awesome to see that the community is growing. Whether they go to the Polyglot Conference or the Polyglot Gathering, which are 2 events, but the community is kind of the same that goes to both of them. It's great to see. It's great to see that so many more people are interested in learning languages, and it's beautiful.
Yeah,
it's nice to see that.
The first gathering changed my life completely. So for me, it's very special, and I know that if people go, even if you're not super polyglot like other people, then just go and see what it's all about, because just the buzz, and like you say, you were also impressed by people and humbled by a lot of talented speakers, and it just gives you like something to strive towards. It just gives you an anchor every year where you can say, okay, I'm doing Spanish now, so I can speak to these 5 people next year, and it's just an incredible experience. And I think the biggest thing is that people are just incredibly nice. It's just great people. Many of them are very ambitious, which I really love to hang out with ambitious people, and yeah, it's just a wonderful experience.
Well, for me also, it's just so beautiful to see to meet other people who spend some time learning Slovak,
right.
all the time, because it's such a small language. It's 5 million people. You don't meet them every day. I mean, there are foreigners living in Bratislava, of course, but when you meet someone from Germany or I don't know any other country, and they come to you like, oh my God, you're from Slovakia, and then they say like, ahoj, ako sa máš, or something. It's just so nice. I love it so much, and I like to do little videos with them or something just to show also the people that follow me in Slovakia, like, look guys, people are learning our language and they're doing a great job, so let's support them.
Yeah, that's exciting too. It happens to me once in a blue moon as well with Danish, but it's a little bit, it's very rare. But
you're never happy with the accent of the people, right?
They never. It's not that I'm not happy. I'm just an honest person, I just say if they ask me, do I have how's my Danish? And I'll say, you speak great, but your accent is not native, or it doesn't remind me of anyone close to native. And
but that's not something we would even expect, right?
No, exactly. But I'm not discouraging it either. I'm just saying that the dialect or the accent in Danish is just ridiculously difficult, and it's not something you just learn in a couple of years, and you need to really pay attention to it. But I try to encourage more than discourage anyway, but of
course, I think you're very encouraging. I just mentioned it because there was a comment or email or something like that. But I believe the Danish accent can be quite tricky. But you see, this is one thing that also this is how I also explain to people how not to be too strict on themselves and how not to be afraid to make mistakes.
Right.
Like, just think of someone you've met in your life who speaks Slovak. I mean, your mother tongue. And it's very rusty. It's like it's very weird, but you love it still, and you just love listening to them because it's just nice. And now imagine someone like, let's say, a French native speaker or a German native speaker hears you speaking their language, and is also happy that you put all the effort in it and you're learning the language. So I think it's very encouraging to think about it this way.
For sure.
Like foreigners learning your language, this is exactly how other people see you.
Yeah. And I think that in my motivation course that I just put out, one of my lectures are called "You'll Never Be Perfect," and I think that's a helpful thing to keep in mind. Also, that just because you work everything you can, you'll never learn everything in Slovak.
Exactly.
You'll never learn everything in Danish. And I think really appreciating what you have instead of what you don't have is a huge quality. And for languages, when you can say one word, people get excited. Like I met a similar, a closely related language. I met a Czech couple in Budapest, and I was like, "How do you say hi in Czech again?" And I was like, "Ahoy!" And the smile on their faces was like beaming, right? And I literally only knew that one word. That was it. So my point is just that language learning is not something where you when you know nothing, it's miserable, and when you finally can speak it, you're home free. No, it's like for every single step along the way, you have enjoyment, you have fun, you have improvement, and then when you've made it to a good level, you're never done. You will never be perfect.
Exactly.
You will never be, like, for instance, there are lots of Danish words I don't know. There are lots of English words I don't know. And that's just the nature of it. You can't learn everything.
I think, exactly, I totally agree with you. I think that's not something people should strive for,
right,
because they're never going to be happy about it. Enjoying the process of learning is so much more rewarding, so much better. And also, like, there are times where I feel like, okay, for now this is okay. I'm happy with this level right now. Later on, if I feel like I want to keep working on my English, German, etc., then I will. But right now, I'll just use the language. I'll be happy with it. So it's once you have this mindset, you're gonna be so much happier in your life.
Right. The pressure's off.
Yes, exactly.
And what a beautiful way to end it as well. And thank you so much for coming on the show and taking the time to share your story. And if people wanted more information about your language mentoring, what you do, where can they find you?
Yeah, well, I have a Slovak website, which is jazykovymentoring.sk, for those who understand a little bit of Slovak, and my English website, which is just basic information about me, just kind of a business card online, is languagementoring.com.
Awesome.
Which I would like to keep working on later on, but right now I'm focusing on the Slovak website and on Slovak Facebook, and of course on Facebook Language Mentoring. So feel free to add me or like the website. I'll be happy to stay in touch.
Awesome. And Polyglot Gathering, is that just polyglotgathering.com or?
Yes, this will be from this week. You can also find us on polyglotbratislava.com.
Oh, okay, great. So that's people can go in and register early, guys.
Yes, please come to Bratislava, come to Slovakia. We are really excited to welcome anyone who is excited about languages. As Chris mentioned, you don't need to speak many languages. You don't need to, I don't know, more than 5 or something like that. There is no limit.
Nope.
We are really happy to welcome anyone who likes the process of learning languages and is interested in languages.
Yeah, or just hanging out and drinking beers with interesting people.
Yeah, sure, that well. But if someone really hates languages, I don't think they would enjoy the gathering.
No.
So if there's, let's say, this little prerequisite, if you have that, then you're very welcome to join us. And I'm sure you'll love Bratislava and Slovakia, and you'll meet a lot of really nice people.
Well, I can't wait. That's going to be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for having me. It was really a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. It was great fun, and really happy that we finally made it happen. We've been talking about it for
so many months.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, I just cut it there.
Thank you for listening to the Actual Fluency Podcast.